Welcome back to Crossover Commander, where we show you how to take your favorite pop culture characters and cross them through the blind eternities so that they can command your deck with style. I'd like to send a huge shout out to my patrons, Deface and Zephyr at my Adept tier, and then Nitron and my new patron Matachu at the Knight tier. Matachu, your deck will be coming here as soon as I get the time to do it. Thank you guys so much for being my patrons. Moving on to the deck, let's go. Let's kick this portal into overdrive, shall we? The Scooby Gang, Mystery Inc., or more importantly, Shaggy and Scooby, are some cool characters from back in the old days of cartoons. Weird fact, Shaggy's first name is Norville. Weird, huh? So I'd like to present to you Shaggy and Scooby, the Magic deck. We've got Shaggy for 5 and a green. This legendary dude enters the battlefield with 5+1/+1 counters on him, and whenever Shaggy or another creature you control dies, if it had a +1/+1 counter on it, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control that has a +1/+1 counter on it, and he has a partner, so that he can partner with Scooby the Ever Faithful for 1 white. This legendary doggo says whenever another legendary permanent enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 on Scooby the Ever Faithful, and he's got partner as well. Like Zoinks, man, if you give me and Scoob a meal first, we can get done in like 8 turns, but if you want us to go to that scary place, it's gonna take like 13, man. And as far as strategy goes, that's normally Velma's thing. She's the one who thinks about that stuff. Claiming victory? Wait, there's going to be fighting? I just wanted a snack, man. This is the perfect time to remind you that this is a crossover themed build. With that being said, crucial cards for the theme will be added regardless of price. Cards that are not essential to fit the theme will be made as budget friendly as possible. Alright, gang, you know the deal by now. Let's get these lands out of the way. We got Command Tower, Crow Sandverge, Myriad Landscape, and Dungeon Descent. Yes, this is going to be a dungeon deck. Then we got Sun Petal Grove, Gingerbread Cabin, because it's also going to be a food deck, Razor Verge Thicket, and Rogue's Passage. Then to wrap it up, we've got the Overgrown Farmland, Canopy Vista, Plains for 9 of them, and then Forests 14. Alright, then we also got some modal dual face lands. We've got Vastwood Fortification, Sajiri Shelter, and Turntimber Symbiosis. They work good in the deck, plus the backsides are lands, so it helps with the land count. Then we've got a Soul Ring for our first part. Then we've got Arcane Signet, Selesnya Signet, and then Magnifying Glass, because of course it's going to be a clue deck too, and then Dungeon Map. Then to round off our ramp, we've got Weirding Wood, Find the Path, New Horizons, and Smothering Tithe. I know it's an expensive card, but it's really the only expensive card in here, so it's all good. Alright, first things first, let's look at the gang. We've got Shaggy, which I already introduced, Shaggy the All-Ingesting. Then we've got Scooby the Ever Faithful. Then we've got Velma for a green and a white. She's got protection from werewolves, because, yeah, of course. And then human creatures you control have tap, add 1 mana of any of this creature's colors. And then for 4, a green and a white, you can tap and put a 1/1 counter on each creature you control. So working more on that counter theme. Then we've got Daphne, the Autumn Sovereign, for 2, a green and a white. She's got Coven, and at the beginning of your combat on your turn, put a 1/1 counter on up to 1 target creature you control. Then if you control 3 or more creatures with different powers, you draw a card. And then we've got Fred, the Tireless Tracker, for 2 and a green. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you investigate. And whenever you sacrifice a clue, you put a 1/1 counter onto Fred. Alright, so I'm going to take a minute to clarify why exactly this is going to be a dungeon deck. Dungeons work fantastically to kind of put out the haunted house energy that this deck needs. So to make sure we can get through these haunted houses, we've got Confront the Unknown for a 1 green. It says investigate, then target creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn for each clue you control. Then we've got Delver's Torch for 1 and a white. Equipped creature gets +1/+1, and whenever equipped creature attacks, you venture into the dungeon. And then you find a cursed idol for 1 and a green. It says choose one, smash it to destroy an artifact, lift the curse to destroy a target enchantment, or steal its eyes to create a treasure token and venture into the dungeon. And then Trail of Crumbs, because I had to, for 1 and a green. When Trail of Crumbs enters the battlefield, create a food token. Whenever you sacrifice a food, you may pay 1. If you do, look at the top 2 cards of your library. You may reveal a permanent card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. Then we've got Expose Evil for 1 and a white. Tap up to 2 target creatures, and then you investigate. Then we've got Uvenwald Mysteries for 2 and a green. Whenever a non-token creature you control dies, you investigate, and whenever you sacrifice a clue, you create a 1/1 white human soldier creature token. And then Root Out for 2 and a green. Destroy target artifact or enchantment, then investigate. And then Fortifying Positions for 2 and a white. Creatures you control get +0/+1, and Fortifying Provisions, when it enters, you get a food token. And then a deck with all this much food and all these clue tokens is not complete without an Academy manufacturer. For 3 generic mana, it says if you would create a clue, food, or treasure token, instead create 1 of each. Then we got Survive the Night for 2 and a white. Target creature gets +1/+0 and gains indestructible until end of turn, and then you investigate. And then Fey Offering for 2 and a green at the beginning of each end step. If you've cast both a creature spell and a non-creature spell this turn, create a clue token, a food token, and a treasure token. Then we've got Thorough Investigation for 2 and a white. Whenever you attack, you investigate. And then whenever you sacrifice a clue token, you delve into a dungeon. Alright, and then to round this section off, we've got Search the Premises for 3 and a white. It says whenever a creature attacks you or a planeswalker you control, investigate. Then we've got Late to Dinner, because Shaggy and Scooby are never late to dinner, for 3 and a white. Return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield and create a food token. Then we've got Humble the Brute for 4 and a white. Destroy target creature with power 4 or greater, and then you investigate. And then we've got Tamio's Journal for 5 generic mana at the beginning of your upkeep, investigate, and then you can tap and sacrifice 3 clues to search your library for a card and put that card into your hand, then shuffle your library. I think Shaggy and Scooby bit off a little bit more than they could chew in these haunted houses, because there's actual monsters here. We've got Legion's Landing for 1 white. It says when Legion's Landing enters the battlefield, create a 1/1 white vampire creature token with lifelink, and when you attack with 3 or more creatures, you transform Legion's Landing into a Danto the First Fort, and that can tap for a white, or you can pay 2 and a white and tap it to create a vampire. Then we've got Anafen's of the Kintree Spirit for 2 white. Whenever another non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, bolster 1. And then we've got the Mayor of Averbrook for 1 and a green, because it's always the mayor. He's a human advisor werewolf. Other humans, creatures you control get +1/+1 in the beginning of each upkeep. If no spells were cast last turn, transform Mayor of Averbrook into the Howlpack Alpha. That gives other werewolf and wolf creatures you control +1/+1. And at the beginning of your end step, put a 2/2 green wolf creature token onto the battlefield. And at the beginning of each upkeep, if a player casts 2 or more spells last turn, transform Howlpack Alpha. Then we've got Hound Tamer for 2 and a green. This human werewolf has Trample, and for 3 and a green, you can put a 1/1 counter on target creature. And then it has Daybound. It says if a player casts, it's the same werewolf thing, but it turns into Untamed Pup. It's got Trample, and other wolves and werewolves you control got Trample. And then for 3 and a green, you can do the counter trick again. Then we've got Cloister Gargoyle for 2 and a white. When Cloister Gargoyle enters the battlefield, you venture into the dungeon, and then when you finish a dungeon, it gets +3/+0 and gains flying. And then we got Bygone Bishop for 2 and a white. It has flying, and whenever you cast a creature spell with mana value 3 or less, you investigate. And then we've got Uvenwald Oddity for 2 and 2 green. It's got Trample and Haste. And for 5 and 2 green, it transforms into the Uvenwald Behemoth. That's got Trample and Haste. And other creatures you control get +1/+1 and have Trample and Haste. And then we've got Dormant Grove for 3 and a green. It says at the beginning of combat on your turn, put a 1/1 counter on target creature you control. Then if that creature has toughness 6 or greater, transform Dormant Grove into the Gnarled Grove Strider. That's got Vigilance, and other creatures you control got Vigilance. Then we've got Ivy Lane Denizen for 3 and a green. Whenever another green creature enters the battlefield under your control, put a 1/1 counter on target creature. Then we've got the Funnel Web Recluse for 4 and a green. That's got Reach. And then Morbid. When Funnel Web Recluse enters the battlefield, if a creature died this turn, you investigate. Then we've got Herd Baloth for 3 and a green. Whenever 1 or more +1/+1 counters are put on Herd Baloth, you may create a 4/4 green beast creature token. And then we've got the Avabrook Caretaker for 4 and 2 green. This human werewolf's got hexproof, and at the beginning of combat on your turn, put 2 +1/+1 counters on another target creature you control. And then the werewolf mechanic, to flip it over to the Hollow Henge Huntmaster for that's got hexproof. Other permanents you control have hexproof, and at the beginning of combat on your turn, put 2 +1/+1 counters on each creature you control. Man, Shaggy and Scooby really messed up this time. They ran into some true eldritch horrors right here. Stone Coil Serpent for X has Reach, Trample, and Protection for multicolored. And Stone Coil Serpent enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it. And then Endless One for X has Endless One enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it. And then Cryptic Trilobite for double X says Cryptic Trilobite enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it. Remove a +1/+1 counter from Cryptic Trilobite to add 2 generic mana. Spend this mana only to activate abilities. And then for 1, you can tap it and put a +1/+1 counter on it. And then Capricorbian for X and green. Capricorbian enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it, and for 2 mana, put a 1/1 counter on Capricorbian. Then you may reselect which player Capricorbian is attacking. Only the player Capricorbian is attacking may activate this ability, and only during the declare attacker step. Holy God, that name's a mouthful. Like, wait, Scoob, they're only people. We've got the Thraben Inspector for 1 white. When it enters the battlefield, you investigate. And then the Byway Courier for 2 and a green. When Byway Courier dies, you investigate. And then Tireless Provisioner for 2 and a green has landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield, you create a food or a treasure token. And then the Briarbridge Tracker for 2 and a green has vigilance. And when it enters the battlefield, you investigate. And as long as you got a clue to any token, Briarbridge Tracker gets +2/+0, and then Briarbridge Patrol for 3 and a green. Whenever Briarbridge Patrol deals damage to 1 or more creature, investigate. And at the beginning of each end step, if you sacrifice 3 or more clues this turn, you may put a creature card from your hand onto the battlefield. And then we all know it, that they would have gotten away with it if it wasn't for these meddling kids. We've got Swords to Plowshares for 1 white. You exile a target creature, its controller gains life equal to its power. Then we've got Hardened Scales to help Shaggy get even bigger. It says if 1 or more +1/+1 counters will be placed on a creature you control, that many +1/+1 counters +1 are placed on it instead. And then we've got the Ozolith for 1 generic mana. Whenever a creature you control leaves the battlefield, if it had counters on it, put those counters on the Ozolith and move them at the beginning of combat on your turn. Then we've got Durable Handicraft for 1 and a green. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay 1. If you do, put a +1/+1 counter on it. And then you can sacrifice this for 5 and a green to put a +1/+1 on each creature you control. And then we got the Lightning Greaves, because we got to make sure Shaggy and Scooby are quick. we all know what it does. It's 2 generic mana, gives equipped creature haste and shroud, and then Ring of Colonia is for 2 generic mana. Equipped creature has trample, and at the beginning of each upkeep, you put a +1/+1 counter on the creature if it's green. And then Together Forever for 2 white. When Together Forever enters the battlefield, you support 2, put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 creatures you control. And then for 1 mana, you can choose a target creature with a counter on it. When that creature dies this turn, return that card to its owner's hand. This will be great protection for our board. Then we got Retreat to Kazandu for 2 and a green landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, put a 1/1 counter on a target creature, or you gain 2 life. And then we got Rite of Passage for 2 and a green. Whenever a creature you control is dealt damage, put a +1/+1 counter on it. And then Alhammar's Archive for 5 generic. It says if you would gain life, you gain twice that much life. And if you draw a card except for the first one you drew each turn, you draw an extra card. And then Cathar's Crusade for 3 and a white. Whenever a creature you control enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. And then the Deck of Many Things, because you can find a lot of crazy stuff in some haunted houses. For 5 generic mana, it says 2, tap, roll a d20, and subtract the number of cards in your hand. If the result is 0 or less, discard your hand. For a 1 through a 9, return a card at random from your graveyard to your hand. For 10 through 19, you draw 2 cards. And for a nat 20, put a creature card from a graveyard, any graveyard, onto the battlefield under your control. And when that creature dies, the owner of it loses the game. And then we've got Martyr's Bond for 4 and 2 white. Whenever Martyr's Bond or another non-land permanent you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, each opponent sacrifices a permanent that shares a card type with it. We're going to make sure that no other player has artifacts, because we're going to be sacrificing these artifacts, making it go. Now that we've seen what the Scooby Gang has to offer as a Magic deck, we can check out the average price. At time of release, it's between $146 and $190, depending on where you purchase from. As always, if you're willing to play with heavily played or damaged cards, this deck is going to be lower in price. Then we got the stats. We've got 11 ramp, 1 kind of tutor in the form of Tamio's Journal, 20 forms of card draw with a little extra sprinkled in for all them clue tokens. And then we've got 13 forms of interaction, 0 board wipes, and 36 lands. Remember, this is a crossover themed build. With that being said, crucial cards for the theme were added regardless of price. Cards that were not essential to fit the theme were made as budget-friendly as possible. If you want to optimize this list, feel free to leave your upgrades in the comments section below. Most importantly, this deck is meant to be a new and engaging way to spice up your Commander games, so fun is the top priority. Thank you for watching this crossover deck tech. If you liked this video, check out our other content on YouTube or TikTok. Your viewership means the multiverse to the crossover Commander, and if you would like to become a part of this growing Terran reality, you can like, share, and subscribe. If you would like to vote on the next pop culture character to cross over, check out our Patreon, where we have some awesome perks. If you have any ideas or complaints, feel free to leave them in the comments section below. Now that this portal's closing, see you next time.